Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the State of the AI Union. I am your host, Laura, and joined with me today is Rutger Katz, all the way from the Netherlands, founder of Neon Triforce, an AI-ready revenue ops company for B2B SaaS. Rutger, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your business as well.
Sure. So my name is Rutger in Dutch. You can call me Roger, which is also just fine. And yeah, my business basically it is helping scale ups between around 10 million to around 50 million ARR to get AI not just within their product, which most of them are, but get it into the go-to-market. So that AI actually helps you to grow. And what people usually think of, oh, we'll get AI SDRs and we'll fix things. But no, the real powerful things of applying AI, you need to work on some of the foundations. So data, processes, documentation. So that's also part of the consultancy program. So it's a full stack of getting a team more effective growth through also AI.
Okay, fantastic. I want to talk to you a little bit more about those processes and data and the data structure that you talked about. But first, before we do that, one of the things that you had mentioned in a LinkedIn post that you wrote was that these companies, they're doing a lot with connecting HubSpot to Claude, hiring GTM engineers, building lots of MCP servers, and they're doing a lot of piloting in sort of siloed projects with no real thread connection between them. So what are the things that you see most often? And then as a result of these siloed projects, what does it end up costing the company down the line?
So what you'll see is you have a few different approaches of how an organization says, okay, we need to invest with AI, we need to do something. One of them is, okay, we'll just give everyone a Claude account or an OpenAI account. Hopefully they'll have a enterprise license and they'll just sort of let people do it and sort of hope that from bottom up, things will arise. Now, in those cases, what you'll get is that teams will create something specifically for them. So it's a very siloed approach. They won't necessarily think about what happens to the customer before their actions or after actions. So if I look at the standard funnel of marketing, sales, customer success, sales will just focus on sales activities, marketing will just focus on marketing activities and not necessarily take the full customer journey into account. An example of something that went awfully awry was that a sales rep that he had built a landing page for a new feature, and he did it very quickly with AI, of course, and he showed it off to his colleagues. And then someone from marketing looked at what sources he used, and he saw, wow, you're actually using the statistics of our competitor. That, of course, is not something that you would like. So to make a long story short, you need to have like a good collaboration of marketing, sales, customer success, because you have your own content. You have your own content pillars. You have your own frameworks, stories, narratives that you can pull up from customer success stories, that you can pull up from sales stories. And that is what you want to put into marketing. But also that is what you want to reuse for sales activities like account-based marketing, maybe for cross and upsell. But you need to ensure that the content is validated, that it is up to date, that it is specific for your organization, that the tone of voice, etc., matches with what you want to share with your audience. So already, I mean, maybe as we are talking, you can hear like, oh yeah, there's this and this and this that all needs to sort of be collected and different teams that need to start talking together. Now, I don't think you can do that from a bottom up approach. So you need to do something top down. And sometimes in that case, what you see in the other direction is that you get an enforcement of, okay, now we're going to hire an AI SDR and sort of that's it. That's our whole AI strategy. And then you don't listen to the people that are actually in your organization. Whereas, as an example, you might want to do transcriptions of sales calls and you want to use that for automatic qualification, put it back into the CRM. And from that data, you want to coach your sales reps. That is, for a lot of sales reps, that is very invasive in their almost inner secrets of, okay, how do I interact with my customers? How am I getting customers along? For a lot of sales reps, they might see that as a threat to their livelihood because they think, well, if they're recording everything that I say and everything that I do, and am I still viable for this job? Will they hire someone else and trade in based on my frameworks, how I talk to my customers? And fire me because I'm successful, I'm probably expensive. You'll run into a lot of resistance within an organization if you don't do that right, and that will lead into a lack of adoption. And then you've created something very expensive, and nobody's using it. So I think those are the sort of the two biggest issues that you have. A lot of investment and no real ROI out of it from both ways. And that depends, of course, of how many seats an organization buys or how many software seats they buy, how many cloud accounts they buy, how many tokens get pushed through. Because you'll also see that organizations like really use a lot of tokens, but their output of all of the token usage is actually quite low. It's one of the reasons that Microsoft pulled out of using AI into their coding because they saw the actual ROI out of it, the benefit that we got from having our developers use code versus the extra cost of that. It's negligible. So why should we do it? And I think that is for every organization to figure out, okay, if we want to do anything with AI, we need to think about what is the ROI, including token usage. How do we get it adopted across the organization? And how do we ensure that our customers actually feel the benefit out of it instead of, getting an automatic chatbot, which almost everyone absolutely hates in the situation that you actually need to talk to a human being.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, from the bottoms up, it's become really easy for individuals to start standing up things like landing pages that that you talked about this in this AE example. And at the same time, if the sources and the information that we are providing or the individuals are using on the bottoms up bottoms up approach isn't reliable, then that makes it tricky and unverifiable, dangerous even. And if you go from a top-down approach without a clear strategy, then the biggest risk that I hear is, change management and not being able to actually implement that because of the behaviors of the individuals. So there kind of have, we kind of have to land somewhere in between. The two examples that you gave are really go to market focus, which I love. And let's actually talk about your foundations and systems that you referred to earlier. What are some things that you come in and help organizations do when they when maybe they've gone through the line and gone through this line of trying to implement AI and it hasn't worked yet?
Yeah, sure. So I always kind of get started with, okay, how's the foundation? And with foundation, I mean, are you familiar with winning by design, revenue
Yeah,
architecture from
yeah.
winning by design? So basically, how is the bow tie looking in the organization? Is the process documentation? How's the process adherence? What does the data look like that they currently have? Like if the data already at that time is bogus, then AI will just make it worse. So then we need to look back at, okay, what are the processes that generate the data? And are these processes then sort of enforced through governance, through coaching, et cetera? So that is a very big part of how you get AI working and valuable within your organization. And the same thing goes for content, for anything that marketing produces or customer conversations. It needs to be structured in such a way that it is easily indexable and findable for an AI, for instance, to always ensure that it pulls out the latest version and doesn't make the mistake coincidentally because it picked up some older folder or, certain things got messed up there. So
And how are you doing that right now?
how? Mm. So process documentation, for instance, sometimes it's just really boring. And that is, if they don't have it, usually it's pretty clear to understand if an organization has good process adherence, because what is always true is you'll ask a senior manager of, okay, how do you have like a good process? Is it adhered to? And it's still, yeah, we have process that's ABC and this is how we adhere to. Okay, then I'll go to a sales rep and ask, okay, so what's the process? Can you tell me about the process and how you enact it? And they'll say, yes, this is process. It is B, C, D, and then we go, maybe we do F and then G. And that's how I do it. Say, okay. And then I'll sit along with the sales rep and see, okay, how do they actually do it? And you'll see, or look into the CRM, and it'll be something completely different. And that is often what you'll find in processes, process documentation, et cetera. So it needs to start with, okay, talk me through the process and talk me also why you do certain steps. That recording and that activity is very good because that can train the LLM understanding the process and also understanding why it needs to have a certain sequence, why that sequence is in place, so that either it can give you feedback or it understands, okay, this is why I need to adhere to a certain process. In terms of data, you always want to do a CRM audit. It's always boring, but I think every good strategy starts with an audit of what is already here, what's already being used. So you need to do a CRM audit, figure out, okay, what are the specific fields that have a low quality? Which ones are absolutely necessary? And so I'm a big fan of Spice, and the qualification needs to be in the CRM, needs to be good in the stage in the CRM. Because if you want to have advice on, hey, how can I improve certain steps within my process? Which customers are good for us, which customers are not good for us? What are resistances we find within our process, and how can we fix those with, for instance, personalized ABM content? You'll need to know what those are. So you need to really think about how can I get data from customer, from the process into a system that is AI readable. I think that is the most important bits. And yeah, how you do it, you'll set up a database, of course. So something within Snowflake, because as an example, because you need to have it structured in such a way of both structured and unstructured data. It needs to be in a structured environment so that it is indexable for an AI to go through. I think those are the important bits to get started with. If that's not there in an organization, that is where you need to get started because that infrastructure needs to get ready. And of course, you can do some piloting or some low hanging fruit AI use cases, but that depends on what is available and whatnot. I always say start with transcribing all the calls and using that for automatic qualification. It's one of the easiest AI flows. You need very little in infrastructure. You need to ensure that you have those fields available in the CRM. Well, that's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes work. And then you need to get and to ensure that the process is adhered to, that your sales reps are using the sales qualification method. That is a longer adoption, but you can already have some insights based out of the transcripts.
So what I'm hearing from you and also from some of your, previous LinkedIn posts are that there are a couple of things. There are a few things like there are a few things that you need to sort of set in place before you can kind of do any sort of work, which are the data that you said, like in Snowflake or whatever, some data thing, shared context, right? How you link the data, the processes that you mentioned, hopefully they're documented. And then last is the tech stack. So these are the four things. And we had just talked about documentation and how companies maybe may have it. But I guess out of all these four things, what do you generally assume companies already have?
Ooh. Well, if an organization is around, let's say, 50 million ARR, I assume that they
Mm.
have a process. I assume that they have a reasonable adherence to that process. Otherwise, it would have been very hard to scale into that level. Especially if it's a fast growing organization, you'll need to be able to get there. ICP is always an interesting thing. Like ICP, again, is very important for AI to have like a good ICP for any SDR work that you're doing, but also for things like, is this content valuable for this ICP? Yes or no? So ICP in the lower ranges, you'll see that ICP is usually a bit messy and it's not very well shared across the different teams. But if you go for a little more mature organization, you usually find that ICP is reasonably well defined. And similarly with their content strategies, they'll have a content strategy, which is of course already good. They'll have bits and pieces of content here and there, and it'll just be a question of, okay, how is your process in marketing of organizing that and structuring that within your organization so you can use it or can read out of it through, yeah, like a set process, like an N8N flow, which sort of just pulls the latest version out of it and drops it into a specific folder that the LLMs can read.
That's like the shared context bit of it, which is making sure that it's pulling, the right things. So talk to me a little bit about the architecture on the tech stack when you're trying to bring all of these things together. Do you have sort of favorite tools that you're using right now?
Oof, rituals. I've working with tech stacks for a very long time, and I've usually found that you'll have 60% overlap of tech stacks, and sometimes like low numbers of 30-40% of actual usage utilization of a tech stack. So often cases there's a lot of bloat. So again, we're looking back at revenue architecture, you want to figure out, okay, what kind of motions are you actually running, and which of those motions are actually the ones that are bringing in the ICP or the most valuable customers. And usually from that, working that way backwards of, okay, what am I seeing, which customers are easiest to upsell, cross sell, working your way back of, okay, how am I actually getting these customers through which channels, and maybe we should focus on those first and leave the others out, or maybe delete them. If you have an organization that is filled with high churn, for instance, or very low cross and upsell opportunities, then maybe you don't have your ICP within your customer base. So you might want to clean up there. And that is a very strategic, a very painful activity, of course, because that would mean that they might have to drop in their ARR in order to sort of get rid of all the bad customers and then restructure and figuring out, so just focus on their good ICP. So yeah, it's in tech stack. I always try and look at it from a value engineering point of view. What is the value that we can get? What is the most valuable motions that we can use? And what technology is used there? And if we can speed up steps, then, with Claude or with N8N, then we sort of try and figure it out. Through lean management, there's this term which is called value stream mapping. And basically, what you do is you look over at all the little handovers that are happening, all the tools that are happening, and you try and figure out, okay, if this is the process now, what can I speed up? What can I automate? What can I improve either through what is required or what is not required by taking away bad ICP fits? But then what can I improve with AI? And what is required to get there? What is the data required to get there? So you do a little bit of back and forth puzzling of, okay, what is it, what we need, and how do we get that within our system? So, because that then helps you understand, what technologies do I need? How do I transfer the data within my organization in such a space that can be queried by an LLM engine or by an LLM tool, because there are plenty of those out right now, in order to, yeah, ideally minimalistically build a technology stack with or without AI. I do all the activities I need to get my ICP in without all that bloat, without that bloated activities, et cetera, et cetera. Because I think a lot of organizations are spending too much money in acquiring customers that they don't need to acquire, or too much money in acquiring with more money than they actually need to get them in.
Got it. Got it.
If that makes sense. I
Okay.
mean, there are a lot of expensive tools out there.
Yeah, lots of expensive tools. You're right. Okay, so I have a question about the balance between foundation and moving quickly and then building on top of that. So as we talked about, many organizations already have some sort of AI pilot going on. And then at the same time their foundations are broken. What would you say to an organization? What would be your advice, I guess, in bridging the gap between those two
Mm.
things? Do we have to put the pilot on hold? Does it mean no one can use AI until we fix those foundations, which could take, months, right? Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts there.
It is one of those annoying questions where the answer is it depends, because it depends on, like with any, how do we, roadmap planning, you'll want to generate a full set of use cases, ones which are low hanging fruit, which are easy to accomplish, which don't need a lot of investment. They might not have the biggest value, but at least you'll learn how to work with AI within your process. And then often you have those high impactful use cases, but they need a little bit of infrastructure to get them going. And the balance is always, how can I structure my roadmap in such a way that I gain most of the value, that I have enough time spent for infrastructure investments? But I think it is very important to Ensure that you have those long-term goals in sight. Otherwise, prioritization always is an issue because I mean, who within the organizations will do AI rollouts and integrate all these tools? Either it is a sort of an IT department or it is revenue operations, and these organizations are often backfilled either due to small requests, which it could be ignored, and those longer, bigger projects usually sort of get pushed down the line, which is a very yeah, it happens, but it's an unfortunate circumstance which sometimes happens within organizations. I see a lot of revenue operations teams also just finishing tickets instead of strategically building out resources or building out strategic infrastructure that will help the organization a lot more on the longer term versus all these little bug fixes on the short term. And how that balances out, it is it is almost like a you need to create like a portfolio of activities of what you want to do and prioritize in between that. And that is some rigorous stakeholder. Yeah, you need to deal with your stakeholders in that sense and keeping them at peace as much as possible. And then that also means is that you need to have your good sponsors. If your CRO or your CEO doesn't understand or doesn't believe in it, then your roadmap will get hijacked, which would be a very big shame. I think that is where a lot of organizations are going to get in trouble with the coming months, the coming years. Like, who is owning that roadmap? Who is in charge of that? And what do they allow to get put on the roadmap? And what are they sort of pushing back as a consequence due to it? I think that your go to market, it is your business. So your CEO should be ultimately responsible. Why I'm also saying that is that you do have a lot of good CROs, but you also have CROs which are very sales oriented, very traditional sales oriented, and they will focus on a specific section, which is usually sales. And whenever you ask them, okay, how can we improve the system? They'll say, we need more leads. And that is exactly not what you want to have. So you'll need to have the right CRO, the right CEO that has that vision of, okay, I want to look at the full customer life cycle. I want to look at the full technology, processes, data, everything that we have in there, and have that entire vision of, okay, how can we tackle this and make this better than what it is currently through AI, through better prioritization, and that takes some time, especially in between, which the CRO has the quarterly rush of, yeah, we need to get this quarter in, we need to get just those good amounts of numbers in, or towards the end of the year, of course, we have that sprint, and that will cloud your prioritization of foundations. I think that
Yeah.
is one of the biggest sort of tensions that any organization will have. That every organization needs to figure out, okay, how do we fix this? How do we go about with this? And it will be a bit awkward and it will be a bit painful, but organizations need to start having that conversation openly.
I think what I'm hearing you say is, we pay for what we get. Like, we might get a little bit of a discount, but if we are investing time and resources, then the payoff will be big. If we are just interested in getting, small, quick wins, then maybe we don't have to do too much on the data foundations. But at the same time, the return on those might be a lot smaller. And I wanted to ask you about just going back to the role of these AI initiatives. But before that, actually, maybe you can tell us about what are some small, quick wins that you've seen work really well without having to do it sort of an overhaul.
Yeah. Without the overhaul, I think once again, the quickest wins is getting sales qualification from a transcript and using that into coaching calls. I think that is the easiest thing to do. And you can use that from the customer success side as well, because you'll get customer stories that marketing can reuse for their content. So that is both a data generating activity as well as an automation in there. The other quickest wins, let me think about it. I think content generation, there's also some quick wins there. I do this myself as well. I have a content system where if you've got your tone of voice in the right document, if you've got your design of this is how our website should look like, this is how we structure it, et cetera, you can create landing pages with Claude Code very quickly. You can create infographics with Claude Code very quickly. And those are real time winners, but you need to have a little bit of an investment in ensuring that the AI understands and produces things that are fit for your organization and fit for your customers. So that requires a little bit more time, for instance, already, but the benefit there really outweighs like the investment that you have to do. I've heard a CMO, it took her, I think, a month or two, but at that point, she like went back and forth between code so often that now she can just sort of tell Cloud Code, this is what I want, and it'll just push out like a perfectly drafted landing page within a few minutes. I think that is very impactful as you are going towards, building different types of activities and campaigns, etc., and make it really personal for your customer at the same time very valuable. I think those are the quickest wins I can think of at the top of my head right now. But I have a list of 25 use cases that I usually run through with any client of, okay, these are, standard case use cases. Another one would be, of course, the SDR augmentation. So not replacement, but augmentation. There's a lot you can do on customer account research that will help an SDR really improve the value that they put in front of their account executive, or to get that personalized outbound message, whether it is a call, whether it is, an email campaign, LinkedIn DM, or a physical product that you send towards that prospect. Account research is so much easier now. It is very easy. Of course, Clay started with it, but that has sped up a huge amount also with Cloud Code, which can do almost the same things as Clay, but it requires a little bit more coding and engineering in that sense. So depending on the organization, whether they're mature or immature, Clay is easy. Cloud Code is the more advanced stuff, cheaper, but more advanced.
Yeah. So I'm hearing the low hanging fruit are call coaching with transcripts. The second one is a content generation. And then the third is on AI research, or account research for the SDR, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's go back to sponsors of these AI programs. I think so. The companies that you are typically working with are like 0 to 50 million. Is that correct? Okay,
Sorry, around 10 million to around 150 million.
10 to 150 million. Okay,
Yeah.
and in that range, where do you see the AI initiatives for go to market typically sitting? Is it in RevOps? Do they have a separate AI initiative? Do they have a separate data AI initiative? And who do you think the right sponsor is for these things?
Yeah. So I see AI initiatives depending, of course, of the size of the organization. You have different roles, right? First, you have the head of sales, which often could be a sponsor. You could have the head of marketing, which could be a sponsor for content related activities, of course. And usually I prefer to start with the CRO because at least they own the entire bow tie funnel, marketing, sales, customer success, which I feel is the most valuable to get everything from your customer in under one individual. And as you sort of progress during the size of the organization, one of the persons I usually like to align with as well is the CFO, because I think any AI use case should touch the P&L. And they're also one of the first persons which will pull out an AI initiative if it doesn't like bring in the good benefits. They'll see that tokens being used with an incredible amount and they'll ask, okay, what's this being used for? Because I'm paying Claude for a lot of money and I'm not seeing any change on my P&L except growing operational costs increasing. So the CFO, I would say, would always need to be aligned with there as well. I think the CEO needs to be the main sponsor in order to get things prioritized, in order to get the folks in within the organization, and to get the employees enthusiasm of why are we going with AI? What is it going to bring us? What is it going to change with us? I think the CEO in that sense is a visionary. People usually go for an organization because of their CEO or the founders, and they need to be behind this. They need to understand it, that it's not just a product thing, but it is also within growth, account growth, a good priority to have. Did I answer all of the questions, or did I forget one?
Yeah, no, that was I think that was the question. Yeah, awesome. Okay, Roger, let's pivot a little bit. You are located in the Netherlands, and
Mm,
you've also done some work in France and Spain across Europe over your career. Tell us a little bit about what it's like working in Europe and European companies that are
mm.
this range 10 to 150 million versus maybe your American exposure. What are some things that are really different?
Yeah, I had a very fun conversation with someone who's in recruitment for revenue operations roles, and he said, and I agree. I see the same thing. Is that Europe in general, in terms of revenue operations, is behind in the US. UK is the most mature one, and they went through some pains, but you see that most of the people talking about revenue operations and really the like in a high maturity, you'll find them usually from the UK because there's a lot of money in there as well. I think across the rest of the organization, he mentioned that after the UK, it is in Germany, the Nordics, and Spain, and a little bit of France as the biggest countries in Europe, which are at least maturing on the revenue operations side. Now, besides that, in Europe, we have, of course, there are two funny things. We are a group of nations, each with their own culture, each with their own language, each with their own way of, how you could sell things to people and what resonates and whatnot. That sometimes makes things very challenging. That sometimes makes things, you need to localize everything. Again, a very good use case for AI for localization. But in the EU, we also have a little bit more stricter legislation. And that means that for certain organizations, compliance, legal, or security, whoever owns that, they usually are very restrictive in what they allow to connect with the CRM, for instance. So, one organization I work with, they wanted to do that use case that I mentioned, where you combine transcripts, you pull them out of sales calls, and you put them into the CRM. But that transcription already, that step of putting things into the CRM, I think it was compliance that said, "Yeah, that's a bit risky. That's a bit, we don't really like that." Europe has a couple of rules in that sense. Is that we don't. Ideally, we want to have local vendors. That's the best case scenario. Local vendors that adhere to legislation. The next best step, because of course we use Amazon Web Services, we use Azure, is that they have local databases where the data is stored locally and is never going to get pushed into the US. And those are the two ideal cases for vendors or suppliers, at least, to be used. So that makes it harder for certain US companies to get into Europe unless they fix that, but it also makes it a little bit harder for us locally to do things with Claude, for instance, especially if the newest model, it had that the little lines, the words after in a contract that says that for 30 days, everything that you sort of query into it from Fable gets pushed into the US and gets saved in the US. So that immediately means that for any enterprise organization, that's a no-go. That is a no-go. Smaller organizations, smaller startups, they'll be like, well, we're still pre-revenue, we're still, 0 to 5 million perhaps. We can bend the rules a little bit. Nobody really will look into our system and figure out, hey, you've been doing some naughty things. But once an organization has investors, once an organization is public or is large enough, they want to avoid that type of risk. So it requires a little bit of extra work on getting anything with AI usable within Europe, and you have to jump through a couple of extra hoops.
Right, 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 right. Okay, cool. Awesome. Roger, thank you so much. This was such an interesting conversation. Any last words before we end our conversation here?
Wow, I've already said so many words on that topic. What I think one of the things that people really need to, I wouldn't say worry about, but think about, is that the usage of AI and using AI within your organization, it does something to the people as well. I've got a neuroscience background, and one of the things that I'm trying to also share with prospects and customers is that anyone within your organization, when they see AI, they might already go into sort of like a fight or flight response, which hurts adoption. But then once you're using AI, it is very easy to offload everything from your cognitive skill set to AI, which is a bad mistake. Because then that person will never understand the process and never understand the skill and doesn't understand when the AI is wrong or what it should do differently. So that is one big problem. And the other is that it is very addictive using Cowork and the Cloud Code or any other AI. And at the same time, you need to ensure that you don't get burned out because you're constantly making micro decisions. And if you're like me, I've got like 5 to 10 different chats open at the same time, and I'll shift from one to the other while it's processing the previous request. And that does a lot for your cognitive load during the day. So check in with the people who are using it and check how their energy is going throughout the day. We have a lot of burnout, I feel, under the younger generation, but also with the older generations now coming up due to pressure and performance and, of course, the economy. But this has an added effect to that. So check in with HR, check in with your employees, and ensure that their mental health is okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. The additional cognitive load actually with all the different chats that can be running, right? Cool. Roger, thank you so much for your time. And to the audience, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, follow us, subscribe, and also leave a comment so we know to bring you more of this content. If not, we will see you next time. Thank you so much for being here. Today's episode is sponsored by Computer by DevRev. Computer is enterprise AI built on one idea. That shared memory makes AI work for go-to-market teams. It connects your systems, conversations, and deal history into one living, breathing digital memory. So your teams get accurate, trusted answers and can take action with confidence. Because Computer curates the right context before it ever hits the model, you consume up to 60% fewer tokens with every call. Find out more and start your free trial at devrev.ai.